It's nice to be with everybody. I hope you're all having a great conference so far. I'm excited, as always, to be able to interact with and talk with the members of the Shingo community. It's sure been a great community for me over the years to learn and one to get to really interact with just a strong community of practice, all trying to do phenomenal things in their organizations and trying to help everybody get better. So today, my topic is hopefully going to present. I know 30 minutes is a short amount of time, but I want to hopefully leave you with one or two things that I've gained from my experience, kind of my old school experience turning companies around. So that is what I did for more than 10 years. I worked in the private equity arena with private investors who owned companies. Companies that had gotten into trouble for one reason or another. Sometimes we were part owners of those companies. And my job was really to go in, assess what was wrong, and quickly make changes, develop leaders, and put new systems in place so that we could restore profitability, have the companies survive, and really thrive going into the future. As we've been in the midst of this pandemic and things have been really crazy for both leaders and organizations, I am finding myself doing a lot of coaching of leaders really in what is an approach that we took to rapidly motivating people, changing culture, solving problems quickly, and getting results in kind of record times. So I've been doing a lot of that. And I hope today to really share some of those lessons that I've learned over the years, and really what has been some of the content that I've been focusing on. The first thing is to understand a little bit about crisis situations. And when I would go into to an organization, and I find this a lot when I'm talking to people about an organization, right now we talk about what the business needs. And when we think about the situation we find ourselves in right now, there's a couple of critical things that the business needs in times like this. Number one is an environment of open and transparent communication, where we're really communicating well and open and honestly up and down and across the organization. Number two, when people are stressed, when they're not as motivated as they may be, when things are not normal in their mind, they need hope for the future. They really need to not be dwelling on the message of the past, but they really need to be having hope for the future. They need leaders who are committed to real change, leaders who are willing to dig in, lead from the front, and really help this change that is so desperately needed to get through times like this. We need to understand the focus of critical drivers. Some of these things are topics that I discussed in a previous webinar series that I did with Shingo. And so you can look back to find out more about that. And I would say one of the most important things, one of the critical keys to success, is we needed to make a commitment to action, and we needed to get quick results. Now, that's not to say that I wasn't seeking to develop people the entire time that we were working through and we were going through the transformation, but it was critical that we used action as the primary means to get results, and that we posted results. We kind of helped people really embrace and own this hope for the future through the wins that we got, the results that we were posting. Now, given all that, what you can see from this list is, it's this blend of focusing on our message and what we're doing. It's this blend of really understanding what are the critical things that we need to change. But what we also need is leaders to really, I needed my leaders to really step up and kind of own their role in this. The problem becomes when you get in a tense situation, or you become, you find yourself in a crisis. Our natural mode, our natural inclination is to retract a bit. It's to go internal. It's to really become a little bit more cautious about what I'm doing. And so when I'm really coaching and when I'm talking to leaders right now, this is what I'm finding in the market. Now, remember, the business needs us to have hope. It needs me to communicate more and connect. It needs me to focus on what I'm doing and really drive quick results. But here's what I'm seeing. Number one, I'm finding a ton of leaders that are really, in essence, paralyzed by fear, not sure what to do next. So they're not doing anything. They're really hunkering down. Number two, a lack of focus. as things are not normal right now, as we all, myself included, have never been in a situation quite like this, the tendency is to add more to our plate. It's really to put more on in terms of what I want to take on, potential actions I could take. And therefore, I'm having more leaders really struggle with this idea of critical focus and critical drivers. There's a host of leaders that I've talked to that are kind of waiting for normal, not really sure where you stand in terms of your opinion on that, but I'm not even sure what normal is going to be and when we might return to that. But there seems to be this waiting, waiting for things to get back to where they were. And finally, what I've seen is that there's a number of leaders who they're becoming a bit too insular. They're really looking inside themselves too much when they really should be looking for help, getting help. I had told one group last week that, every time I turned around a company, this idea that you're a solo guy going in to fix the organization is completely crazy. It just doesn't happen like that. Number one is your success is directly tied to your ability to mobilize people and get them to help you accomplish your goals. And number two, I always had a host of people that were willing to advise me, willing to help me in terms of, beat up my plan and make sure that it was sound, question some of my thinking on it, really ensure that I was doing okay as a leader when I got in the midst of struggles. So not seeking help is another one that I see. So these are the four things that I see going on. At the same time, the business really needs us to be open. The business needs us to take action. The business needs us to have a vision for the future, get started with us. And it really needs us to be able to rally everyone around this compact and this really focus we have. Now, part of it is really understanding a bit more about this fight or flight. When we get into modes where we find ourselves in crisis, where things are not going well, we're not really sure what tomorrow will bring. We're not sure, really, quite frankly, if what we thought will work yesterday is going to work tomorrow. Then we really find ourselves into this mode where we're under an enormous amount of stress, and it's a different type of stress. I found myself succumb to it when I was a leader in these situations, and I watched it happen with my people. You would see physiological changes manifest, heart rate and blood pressure would go up. There'd be tension, trembling. People would constantly be feeling on edge. So this is kind of the mood that would take over an organization. And I sure see it as I'm interacting with more leaders in their organization, this palpable kind of fear and uneasiness out there. Now, the thing that complicated that is that when you get into that situation, working memory goes down, my ability to focus and my attention span goes down, and my cognitive flexibility also goes down. So when we talk about in good times or normal times, these cultures of excellence and what we're asking people to do, we're aspiring to a culture of flexibility, adaptability, focus, cooperation, connection. And these factors that we find ourselves in when we would get into these crisis modes or into these turnaround situations are really working against us. Now, why do I tell you all that? I tell you all that because over the 10 plus years that I was doing that, I found three critical things I needed at all times: focus, simplicity, and speed. So it didn't matter whether I was talking about the development I was doing. It didn't matter whether I was talking about the plan for the future. Didn't matter whether we were talking about projects, initiatives. Didn't matter whether we talked about our problem solving or our ability to quickly innovate, and improve. Everything went through the filter of, are we focused? Is the process, the design, or the thing that we're doing simple? And can we execute quickly? Can we execute quickly? Now, when I started thinking about this topic of embrace scientific thinking, and what that means to me and what I've seen over the years, and even more importantly, maybe what did this idea or this principle of embrace scientific thinking mean in a turnaround environment? I sought to go back to a definition of this, this idea that it's a mode of thinking, that it's in where the thinker improves the quality of his or her thinking by taking charge of the structures. I mean, there's a lot of words to that, But in essence, it's about our way of thinking, or to me, our approach to how we're thinking about our problems, how we're thinking about the quality of our problem solving itself. But the more I dug into it, the more I found that scientists rarely follow one straightforward path. It's rarely a simple sequence of 3 to 11 steps that constitute the scientific method at all times. It's really a complex process of discovery, some discipline and discovering mixed together. And what I have seen over the years, and I see still out in the market, is that when we would talk to groups, whether it's our own clients who have been on the Shingo journey and challenging, for recognition, or it's new groups that are really trying to wrestle with this idea of what is this principle of embrace scientific thinking, more often than not, while scientific thinking in and of itself doesn't advocate for one specific approach to how you solve problems, most of the organizations I still come in contact with overwhelmingly support the idea that embrace scientific thinking is highly correlated with adopting and using PDCA, that those two things go hand in hand. Now, I'm not here to argue with that. I'm just providing my perspective to you. But when we look at PDCA itself, there are some pros and cons that you'll find when you dig into PDCA to solve problems. Number one, let's look at the pros. It is a simple model to use. There are many people who are familiar with it conceptually. Maybe they've made their own adjustments to that model or to their thinking about how they're going to approach it. It does allow us to test solutions and assess results as we're going along. It avoids the risk of large and untested changes, kind of that risk of doing something big and innovative that may, not work out. So it's got some positives to it that people really resonate with. But it's also got some struggles. And those struggles really are about, it can be too slow at times. When I look at organizations that have a PDCA process in place, the amount of documentation they have to do, the number of steps, the coaching and the mentoring that go along with it, the gated system that they have to regulate it and to ensure that it's a standard process everyone's using, can be slow. And when I'm putting on my turnaround hat, it made me nervous. It made me nervous, the amount of time that it can take to go through the cycles, the PDCA cycles. It tends to require more buy-in from the team. Sometimes that can be a real struggle. I wouldn't always tell you that I see team members really engaged about a PDCA process that an organization has put in place. And when time is of the essence, you are on the clock and you really need to make decisions quickly and get impact. I didn't find that it was the best for my urgent problems, my emergency problems. So in a turnaround environment, I felt that there were some concerns. I really felt that I really needed to use scientific thinking, but have a faster way to do it. Really had a more flexible and adaptable way to approach our problem solving. Now, this last year too, I've also been working on a book with Yabe-san. Yabe is he is the former chairman of TESE. I'm really excited to see that Shingo has used the case study of the turnaround at TESE in some of our courses. And, as I met him and got the opportunity to work with him in Japan and really find out the depth of kind of his leadership style and what he really believed, as I've worked with him and as I've been writing about kind of what I did at turnarounds and what he's done and kind of our really common understanding of what a role of a leader is, he said something to me one day and it really kind of rocked my world. And he said, well, I don't use PDCA anymore and more companies in Japan are following suit and not using it. And I said, well, Yabe-san, will you please explain what you mean? Why not? Why are you not using PDCA? Now, this has got a little bit of his word. These are his words translated through. But he said, I don't use PDCA anymore because this approach creates a lot of stress for people. It's always about seeking numbers, and top management uses PDCA to control people. Top management usually does the plan. Then the do is actually telling people what they must do. The check is looking over people's shoulder, and act is top management analyzing and making another plan. So whether you agree with him or not, what I found interesting was looking at his opinion of PDCA from the standpoint of what it did to engagement, from the standpoint of what he was trying to do. And in essence, when he orchestrated Tessay's turnaround in 2 short years, dramatically improving the culture, dramatically improving problem solving, dramatically improving their results, he really focused on balancing, discipline and execution, but really motivating his people to want to solve problems. And for him, he took a different approach. PDCA was limited in terms of, or limiting in his mind, in terms of what it did for engagement. Now, as I got to think about that more, I'm looking at these two things on side by side. I'm thinking, okay, in a turnaround environment, we've got to do a couple of things. We need to act quickly. We need to get results and bring hope to people. We need to motivate them and mobilize them to be part of this change from the beginning if we're going to have a chance to not only survive, but to thrive and build something going forward. So I sat back and I said, okay, so one of the things that then we did every time that I was working through an organization that I was turning around is this idea of we're mobilizing everyone to solve problems every day. And while I'm not going to submit to you a model, I'm not going to say, okay, here is the model that I used. Here's the one that was exactly done this way each and every time. I thought about it and said, well, what were some of the hallmarks to how we engaged people quickly, how we broke down cultural barriers very fast, and how we got people to own not only their problems, but to own their approach to working with teams to solve those problems each and every day. So with this, we'll kind of hit these top 5 and then I will stop there. So number 1, and probably the biggest thing, was a tight focus on the right results and crystal clear goals. I find myself coaching leaders right now a lot on this key point. In essence, it's this idea that the tighter my focus, the clearer my goals, that are not goals that are determined at each individual level, but that are aligning to the overall organizational success. The more that I can translate those dailies, the more that they can clearly be captured and translated into verbiage that people can use and can see and can hold on to, the easier it is for them to identify problems to solve, prioritize problems, and really work towards solving those problems every day. So that's a critical part. Number 2, it's to keep the method that we use to solve problems as simple as possible. Now, again, I probably really side a lot more on trusting people to do the right work, on understanding that in the midst of rapid change and getting big results, we are going to make mistakes, but we're going to rapidly learn from that, and we're going to grow and develop together. So, my approach may not sit with you well because it may scare you, that I really focused on less documentation and more on solving problems in real time with each other. And so I had a series of questions that I asked myself whenever I would approach identifying an issue, understanding what we were going to do, and our follow-up. And I spent my time really focused on helping people learn those questions and really trusting them to use those questions. So it was not uncommon in the midst of a crisis for people to be nervous to make decisions, for them to be worried that what if, I make a decision and it doesn't turn out to be right. So I would have leaders all the way down to teams want to have me solve their problems. And I was very purposeful about teaching them how I approached problems, telling them how I would consider making a change, or whether something might be an action that I wanted to take. And then I would help them learn how to do it. And very quickly, I had to shut off even answering questions. So therefore, what I was trying to do was to create an environment that if they came to me to try to have me solve the problem, I was going to kick those questions right back and help them answer them on their own. Soon, it didn't take long. I mean, we're talking a matter of 30 days at most before they didn't want to bring those to me, because they knew my response was to have them answer those questions the same way that I would attempt to answer them. Now that led us to number 3. I really put a premium on taking action to see the outcomes versus collecting data to see the trends. Okay. I really, I really wanted us as an organization to put a higher value on discussing working as a team, determining an action we were going to take, but understanding really clearly how we were going to see whether the action we took gave us the result we wanted. So I wanted to quickly leverage people with experience, their gut feeling, their knowledge of the process, their understanding about the pain and this cause and effect relationship. I wanted to put it into action quickly, and I wanted us to see our results, as opposed to having somebody positive, pose a hypothesis, determine how they were going to collect data over time, analyze the trends, dig into it, and then come to a recommendation. Now, I may be being a little, I may be being a little dramatic there, but I saw most people use that process of collecting data over time as a reason why we wanted to cover our rear ends versus taking action. So I really focused on take action and see versus collect. Okay. Finally, and this one I think is pretty, this one's pretty commonplace right now. You hear it talked about a lot, teams owning the problem-solving process. But I really, really believed in and promoted through my leaders that teams are smarter than individuals, hands down. If a team understands, number one, what those goals, the focus is, and what we really have to accomplish, if we've given them, number two, simple ways to ask a few questions, to make a decision to move forward, if we have encouraged and almost pushed them to take action and see if it works, rather than to collect and make recommendations back, then what we really wanted to do was to create an environment where get that team, have the team solve the problem, have the team discuss the issues, have the team focus on owning this on a daily basis. And that daily basis, in my mind, really came down to we had an hour every day that was completely dedicated to just improving, okay, just improving. And in each organization I went into, this was kind of hotly contested early on with the investors. I mean, we would shut the whole place down. We couldn't keep up with current production, but we would shut it down to take an hour to give our teams that structure and that time so that they could really make improvements. It rarely went more than 2 weeks before we had gotten that hour plus back easy. We had made up all the time and we were starting to make real movement. But during that time, I really sought to flip this whole equation in people's minds that as leaders, we are here to support you owning and solving the issues that are going to help the organization accomplish our goals. And that was really critical. What we found was that people rapidly improved when they focused on action, when they understood the outcomes, and when they really focused on working with a team. It was amazing the rate of change that we had. I know I'm winding down with just a couple of minutes to go here. I ran across this quote not too long ago, and I really felt like I wanted to end with it because, part of what it takes to really thrive in a crisis or to rapidly turn an organization or to just change the trajectory of where you're going, radically, it takes, as a leader, being impatient. It really takes this focus on determining, number one, what my plan of action is. Number two, how am I going to engage people to do it? And number three, how am I going to ensure that that system takes motivated people and makes it easy for them to help us accomplish those things that are most critical and that are most important to that vision we're building. And in this work, it's interesting how this idea of letting speed help guide the simplicity of the system not only is good from the standpoint, being impatient is a great way to get things done faster, but the research has also been shown that across a surprising number of domains, being fast correlates strongly with being effective. So, when I have someone tell me that the reason that we're going to slow down and put more process in place to ensure that people understand problem solving so that they can do a better problem solving, I will usually push back and say, if you haven't experienced what focus and pace can do for the quality of your problem solving, it's really something to explore.